the invitation. Really appreciate the invitation from Zach and Mark to be able to present to you all. I did see a little bit of Dan Donato's presentation from last month, and I think that there will be some overlap. It was a great presentation. Zach and Mark had made sure that is uploaded to YouTube, so you can access that talk there. But yeah, I wanted to talk to you all today about coastal fire history, the Tillamook Burn, and then also what you can do to prepare for the coming fire season. And just to confirm, you all can hear me right now and you are all seeing my screen, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, all right, excellent. Thank you very much. 1 second. Okay, so this is from Oregon Explorer showing both the Lower and Upper Nehalem Watershed Council territories. So you see a lot of evergreen forest, deciduous forest, as well as farmland in the Lower Nehalem. Wanted to kind of show as well slope across both the Lower and Upper Nehalem. Those areas of darker purple are steeper slopes, and those shades of less powerful purple are gentler slopes. And topography is a major component with regards to the spread of fire. So just some things to keep in mind throughout the course of the presentation. So historically, I came across this picture of a log jam on the Nehalem River. So obviously both fishing and logging being major historic industries within the region. I just made a trip down to Tillamook. I accompanied Tillamook Bay Community College and Dave Wells, who was also teaching the forest dendrology class, and our students visited the Pike Road Fire site. I'll show a couple pictures of that in a moment. But on the way back, I decided I'm going to go up the Miami Foley Road and then also check out Nehalem River Falls. So I wanted to share pictures of that gorgeous landscape with you all. Here is ODF fire history for 1911 to 2000. Keep in mind, there certainly were fires occurring across the Coast Range prior to 1911, across the entire state prior to 1911. And then you can also see in the case of the 2020 fires, it's kind of off the chart as indicated by the red arrow here that's yellow with the yellow print next to it. So here in the state of Oregon, since 1984, there has been an increase in the total annual burned acreage due to wildfires. Here were major wildfires during Oregon's 2020 fire season. And, you know, due to my position as a regional fire specialist in the Coast Range, I covered Columbia, Clatsop, Tillamook, and Lincoln counties in their entirety, and then also portions of Lane, Douglas, Benton, Polk, Yamhill, Washington, and Multnomah counties as well. And so while not as large an extent as Riverside or Beachy Creek or the Holiday Farm fires, the Pike Road Fire in Tillamook, the Echo Mountain Complex fire in Lincoln, outside of Lincoln City, and then also the Sweet Creek Fire within the Siuslaw and Western Lane County, as well as the Powerline Fire in Washington County and the Chehalem Bald Mountain Fire between Washington and Yamhill counties, I think need to serve as a reminder of the danger of fire that is posed within the region. I'll get into more of some of those major factors, but to recap a little bit from Dan Donato's talk, some factors contributing to fires within the West west of the Cascades and also the Coast Range are exceptional drought, a lot of fuels, and then also those synoptic east wind events. In the case of the Sweet Creek fire, fire crews were able to control the blaze right before those synoptic east winds started to occur. Here was the Pike Road Fire site that was just over 300 acres. According to Oregon Department of Forestry, it's still under investigation. But you can see a mosaic of vegetation that was burned across that landscape. And then also the Tillamook Bay Watershed Council has undertaken some weekends to undertake restoration work and also planting of shrubs. Here was the Echo Mountain Complex fire, roughly about 2,500 acres. The cause of that is officially still under investigation, but it destroyed many homes. So when does fire occur? I wanted to call attention to marine West Coast forests. You can see there the distribution of ignition sources throughout the course of the year. And then there's also the Northwest forested mountains, including the Cascades and Blue Mountains, and then the North American deserts that would include southeastern Oregon as well. So 4th of July is the day of greatest fire activity, human ignitions. Note that in the case of the marine West Coast forests, well over 90, if not 95% of ignitions are due to humans. And then while there is a greater role of lightning in the Northwestern forested mountains and the North American deserts, even in areas where there is lightning caused fire, human ignitions have lengthened the fire season. And then for seasonality of lightning versus human ignited wildfires, we can see for the marine West Coast climate, ignitions during June, July, and August. And then in the case of human caused fire, predominantly June, July, and August, but also going into September and October, November for a little bit of Southwest Oregon as well as Southeast Oregon or East Oregon. Where does fire hit? Increasingly occurring at the wildland urban interface between 1990 to 2000. The number of homes increased by over 41%. So it went from over 30 million homes to over 43 million homes. And so within the perimeter of wildfires between 1990 and 2015, there were 286,000 houses in 2010 that were in the perimeter of those wildfires versus about 177,000 homes in 1990. So the wildland urban interface land extent has increased about 33%. So about 9% of the USA's total land area is within the wildland urban interface, and that's projected to double by 2030. As well as an increase in population. So that wildland urban interface growth often results in more wildfire ignitions, and that puts more lives and houses at risk. So in short, it's estimated that climate change has doubled the amount of land that burns every year since the 1970s. Wildland fire costs have significantly increased. It's an increasing share over greater than 50% of the U.S. Forest Service budget at this point, to the detriment of, forest and rangeland research, conservation, recreation, and other aspects of forest management across the United States. Human-caused ignitions are lengthening the fire season. There's also an increase in the number of days of extreme fire weather and less summer precipitation. And also I wanted to call to attention, I'll have some specific slides with regards to Native American burning and land management. Also keep in mind settlement patterns of agriculture, logging, and grazing histories, a history of fire suppression, and then also globally, there's been about an 18% increase in the length of the fire season, but across the US West, it's been about an average of 2.8 months increase in the duration of the fire season. So effectively, we have changed the structure and composition of our forests, as well as the configuration of land uses and land covers across the landscape. So some content for today will be, I'll have a preface on wildfire and watersheds. I'll talk about OSU's new fire program within Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, coastal fire history, fire in the Nehalem watershed, and also fires in Clatsop and Tillamook counties, going into the 2021 fire season, and what you can do to protect your home, family, and land. How wildfires impact a watershed. As a regional fire specialist, my interest in fire extends to fire preparedness and fire prevention, but also during a fire, as well as after a fire. And talking to Mark and Zach, as well as talking to other Watershed Council leadership across the coast, I think it's really important to understand the experiences of watershed councils post-fire, but also that watershed councils are very strategically positioned to operationalize a restoration response following any wildfire. But in terms of how wildfires impact a watershed, they can cause sediment and erosion, flooding and mudslides, can impact water, drinking water for communities. This is kind of a flow chart that's through Alberta, Canada, and also the use of fire retardants. So if aircraft are involved in fire suppression activities, that fire retardant can certainly impact water quality. So wildfire impacts upon a watershed, post-fire runoff, nutrients, dissolved organic carbon, major ions, and metals can harm ecosystems and aquatic life that live in affected watershed. Fish are vulnerable to chemicals such as mercury that are often liberated by fire. During extreme precipitation following a wildfire, soils may not be able to absorb as much moisture as they normally do, causing severe flooding, extreme sedimentation, and the liberation of undesirable chemicals. Post-fire erosion and transport of sediment and debris downstream impacts water treatment plants, water supply reservoirs, and aquatic ecosystems. Here's an example of post-fire impacts in California with some dead fish. So some implications of wildfire for drinking water. The degree to which wildfire degrades water quality and supply depends on the extent and intensity of wildfire, post-wildfire precipitation, the topography, as well as local ecology. Enhanced mobilization of nutrients, sediments, and dissolved organic carbon can impact the ability of drinking water utilities to produce water that meets Environmental Protection Agency standards. Increased turbidity may increase chemical treatment requirements and produce larger volumes of sludge, both of which would raise operating costs, and then also highlight the need for finding alternatives. This is Cameron Falls with black soot and charred debris about a year after a fire burned through Waterton Lakes National Park in Alberta. Wildfires are not always bad for watersheds. On an evolutionary or ecological time scale, those stand replacing wildfires that occur in west of the Cascades within the Pacific Northwest. Even with a stand replacing fire, there's certainly going to be, it's going to impact aquatic life and may even kill a lot of aquatic life, but in the long run, there could be recovery of ecosystems. So wildfires are not always bad for watersheds. The erosion that often follows replenishes the coarse-grained sediments that are critical to fish habitat. Fires flush in nutrients that are beneficial to fish. And then also, according to John Moody, a U.S. Geological Survey scientist, in the years since the major forest fire in 2003 in the Castle Crown Wilderness west of Warrenton Lakes Park, the fish in burned areas have grown larger than fish in unburned areas, mainly because large amounts of nutrients released by the fires have flowed into the rivers and creeks. Okay, so OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program. The fire team, our program was authorized by the 2019 budget, and the first two team members were Carrie Berger, our program manager, and then Daniel Lavelle, our state fire specialist. And then I was brought on in January of this year. My duty station is Clatsop County, so I'm based in Astoria at the Clatsop County Extension Office. My colleague Amanda Rao covers Willamette Valley and Cascades. Chris Adlam is in Southwest Oregon. Ariel Cohen is in Central Oregon. John Rizza, based out of La Grande, covers Northeast Oregon. And then Katie Wolstein this is a cross-college fire program. Katie is actually in the College of Agriculture Department of Animal and Rangeland Sciences, and she's based in Burns at the Experimental Agricultural Station. We're still formulating our mission and values and priorities, but some of the things that we are mandated to do is assist in identifying landscapes in highest need of a strategic focus of resources to reduce wildfire and landscape health risks at a statewide scale, assist with the implementation of projects on the ground in priority landscapes, provide education and outreach throughout the process for all Oregonians, create fire-adapted infrastructure, communities, and landscapes across the state of Oregon through awareness, education, and outreach, and foster resilient landscapes, fire-adapted communities, and safe and effective wildfire response. One of the things that we're currently doing with the participation of forestry and natural resource extension agents and educational program coordinators is Wildfire Wednesdays, Fire Aware, Fire Prepared. Please join us next week on the 16th, Wednesday the 16th at noon. We'll have After the Fire, and we'll be bringing in representatives from insurance, county emergency management, as well as hopefully federal emergency management agency. So these, and there are resource packets for each of these webinars. You can attend these webinars live, and these webinars are also recorded and uploaded to the Forestry and Natural Resources Extension YouTube channel. So here's kind of a bird's eye view of fire risk in Northwest Oregon per the quantitative wildfire risk assessment that really doesn't adequately illustrate wildfire risk in Western Oregon. OSU's Extension's fire program is developing a GIS hub for more localized assessment of wildfire risk. Were there any questions? I'm sorry, Zach, any issues right now? Okay, I'll continue.
We had a comment here. I would suggest that a benefit of fires to watersheds could also be the addition of debris flows and large wood to stream channels that have the potential to increase channel complexity.
Oh, that's a great point. Excellent.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That's great. I'm going to make sure I download the chat. So great comment.
Could I ask another question in that vein? It would make it seem as if inhabitants of the interior coast have nothing to be worried about, but to the likewise, you know, this was where the Tillamook Burn of 35 terminated.
I will definitely be addressing the Tillamook burn, and I'm also going to be talking about how the QWRA has a lot of value, but in terms of illustrating that risk for Western Oregon, definitely one of the things that OSU's fire program is doing right now is developing a GIS hub for more localized assessment. I'm going to be briefed on that sometime next week. I'm not sure when that's going to be available publicly, but I will definitely, share results with stakeholders as time goes on. In terms of some of the assessment that's been conducted by Daniel Lavelle, our statewide fire specialist, in terms of assessing high value resources at risk, that includes people, buildings, infrastructure, agriculture, timber, habitat, species, as well as water. This is still in the peer-reviewed process. It was requested for revise and resubmit, but I wanted to share with you the overall risk across my fire service area. And so you can see on this map, there are certainly areas, north of Nehalem Bay, near Oswald West State Park, but also Cannon Beach and Arch Cape, and then also parts of the Nehalem watershed as well. But I definitely think that this is one strategy of assessing wildfire risk. I'll be curious about experimenting with GIS and other methods. I also think I need to get out and walk the landscape with different landowners to kind of understand fire risk even better. So in terms of coastal fire history, this was from preliminary reconstruction and analysis of change in forest stand age classes in the Oregon Coast Range from 1850 to 1940. So you can see in 1850, greater than 30% of the area burned, and then also subsequently other areas, although not exceeding about 10%. Of the area burned during those during that sequencing, the 1850, 1890, 1920, and 1940. So some special considerations, I would say there is a gap in knowledge related to fire history and fire ecology for the coast, especially compared to Southwest Oregon or Eastern Oregon. The Pacific Northwest Research Station's West Side Fire Initiative is using dendrochronology on the western slopes of the Cascades. For the coast, that's pretty much been restricted to historic fire maps. There's also the Bureau of Land Management's general land survey data. And an example of that, Bob Zyback's the Alsea Valley Prairie Complex, circa 1850. Native landscapes in Western GLO surveys. My position does include some applied research and scholarship, and so I'll be interested in finding what I can find out about landscapes across the Coast Range using those Western GLO surveys. But with regards to that data collection, there are different agencies and organizations. There may be different standards to that data acquisition. There's also the issue of spatial and temporal extent. So from Bob Zyback, Native American land management for thousands of years, ancestral Oregon Indian families kept ridgeline and riparian areas open for travel, hunting, fishing, and harvesting purposes. They cleared ground fuels by constant firewood gathering, root harvesting, and seasonal fires. These actions created widespread systematic fire breaks in a beautiful landscape characterized by foot trails, grass prairies, southern balds, huckleberry fields, camas meadows, oak savanna, and islands of mostly even-aged conifers. Note that long-term, I would like to work with the tribes on cross-boundary management and also work with them to co-produce knowledge. Returning to the forest stand age classes for the Oregon Coast Range. You can see large areas that were burned as of 1850, and then less area burned as of 1890. Sorry. And then the forest stand age classes for 1920, and then in 1940, you definitely see recently burned, that recently burned being the Tillamook Burn. But I wanted to point out the mosaic across the landscape of different areas that are burned, and then other areas where there may be, 50 to 100-year-old trees, or even trees greater than 100 years old. So from Bob Zyback, his dissertation, you can see the Millicoma Fire, Yakina Fire, Nestucca Fire, Coos Fire, and also the multiple burns of the Tillamook Burn, 1933, 1939, 1945, and 1951. But I definitely want you to pay attention to the occurrence of these events during August or September. And then also the map by Zyback and Matsky showing, well, in red, that area being elements of the Tillamook Burn, but also late 18th century fires, late 19th century fires, as well as those early 20th century fires. And then the mosaic of land covers across this landscape, including oak savanna and upland prairies, Sitka spruce, wetland prairies and tidelands, Douglas fir forest land. So here was 1933, the Tillamook Burn blows up. A smoke column rose 8 miles high and was seen throughout Western Oregon and Washington.
Pardon?
The picture was taken on August 25th, 1933, as the Tillamook Burn fire blew up, and the smoke column rose 8 miles high and was seen throughout the Pacific Northwest, the Western Pacific Northwest. And then to give a little context on this picture, on a single day in August, on August 24th, 1933, the Tillamook Fire increased over 200,000 acres in size, and that created a mushroom cloud that was 40 miles wide and 8 miles high. It produced hurricane scale winds that furthered the spread of the fire. And this was a pyrocumulonimbus cloud that was formed by water vapor, ash, soil, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. Picture of the aftermath of the Tillamook Burn. So this is a map from some of the work by Charles Daig in terms of that 1933 footprint of the fire. So as you can see, both the lower and upper Nehalem watersheds were definitely impacted by this burn. And then just wanted to show that the 1933 Tillamook Burn, began and burned for a while, but then it wasn't until the 24th of August that it really blew up, and you had 200,000 some acres consumed by the flames in a very short time period. This is from a student's master's thesis using geographic information systems. I would like to look at the replicability of his study, but this is showing a specific subset of Clatsop and Tillamook counties, as well as a little bit of Washington and Columbia counties, showing the extent or the footprints of pre-1929 fires across the landscape, as well as the 1933 Tillamook Burn, and then also 1939, 1945, and 1951, with 1951 being one of the smaller Tillamook burns. Um, this is a pretty congested slide, but basically I wanted to show that there are areas that were burned over in some cases not only once, but burnt over multiple times. And so the footprint of those fires, the data sources are different that ODF is using, are different from what Chen was using in his master's thesis. So I'd like to get to the data that both ODF has and then also review the sources that Chen used. As a geographer, I'm very interested in GIS.
One question on this slide is, do the delineations of forest type correlate with severity of burn or passageway of fire from, south to north?
I don't have the kind of land cover or land classification data specific. Like these two maps are really just showing the footprints of those fires. In the case
Right,
of
more important, before the Tillamook burns, there were large mosaics of hardwood and, like nut-bearing trees, that were oases of food nutrients, and those are the sorts of patches that are missing now, in the monolithic stands of conifers. You have no food bearing trees, upon which the economy of most forests is based on.
okay, thanks
It
for the
almost looks like the fire just ripped through hardwoods and left pine forests intact.
well in the case of the post Tillamook burn. There was a tremendous effort for over 20 years that involved planting of millions of trees, both by the people of Oregon as well as by helicopter. Um, Generally, the Tillamook State Forest is even age stand of Douglas fir. So the point is well taken in terms of what was the mosaic of forest types prior to the Tillamook burns versus what the mosaic of forest types is today. In terms of what I would need to look at the historical records and probably also get into those GLO Western Land Survey data to understand more about what that landscape looked like prior to the Tillamook burn. But certainly it could be argued that the Tillamook forest is a very anthropogenic forest in terms of um, the human effort that was expended. Granted, a human effort expended predominantly for Douglas fir. But yeah, the point is well taken of what could be done in riparian areas and also what.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. That might be it, the replacement of a natural forest maintained by, the Native Americans, that was later a failure by our initial attempts to turn it into a wood source. And the Tillamook burn, the Tillamook burn corrected us into a new era of land management, perhaps.
Yeah, that is a really good point in terms of, well, what are the management goals and objectives of state forest or of industrial timberlands versus what landscapes existed in the region, particularly prior to European settlement, but then also prior to the Tillamook burn. I'm definitely putting that on my, research agenda.
Thank
And yeah, well, and this slide actually kind of speaks to your comment as well in terms of, what management emphases were in place in 1975 versus 1996. There definitely was a major shift that occurred between the 1970s and the 1990s with regards to greater ecological objectives, certainly on federal lands. And then also, in terms of the state forest system of Oregon, a mixture of both timber and ecological objectives. The ownership is really complex across the Coast Range landscape, really quite dominated within the upper and lower Nehalem watershed, state forest land, but then also private industrial, and then also small woodland owners as well, and then to some degree farms as well. So fire in the Nehalem watershed, this is protection map sheet index for Northwest Oregon that would include the Nehalem. This is a monitoring trends in burn severity. Now keep in mind the data range that we have only goes back to 1984, but it only includes those fires that are greater than 1,000 acres. So just looking at this tool, the monitoring trends in burn severity, it's like, oh, well, since 1984, there has been no fire over 1,000 acres within the watershed. This is from the Oregon Department of Forestry's fires list through their statistics website for the Astoria and Tillamook districts. I broke it down. They only go back in time to 1960, so I broke it down by decade. And I highlighted in the case of Tillamook for that 2020 to 2021, what I highlighted there most recently. Can anybody tell me what's going on there for 2021 in the Tillamook district with total fires of 9 and the ODF acres burned at 311? Any thoughts from you all as participants in this talk? It's the Pike Road Fire was about 301 acres. So that's the majority of the fires that have occurred thus far, between 2020 to the present. In the case of 1970 to 1979, there was a major fire within the Nehalem watershed that I'll get to in just a moment. But I wanted to call attention to, the total number of fires being, over 1,300 for Oregon Department of Forestry's Astoria district, essentially Clatsop County. And then in the case of ODF's Tillamook district, 1,000 fires. And in terms of the extent of land burned, since 1960, it's less than 3,000 acres in either district. And I just wanted to point that out to you all in terms of the number of ignitions that are there, but also what other factors are at play in terms of, well, in this case, many of the fires were able to be brought under control rapidly by either ODF or fire departments. So some things to keep in mind: exceptional drought. Sometimes not only exceptional summer drought, but exceptional summer drought in the preceding even year to 18 months. And then also those east wind events. But keep in mind those ignition sources, there are literally across Clatsop and Tillamook counties, there have been thousands of human-caused ignitions since 1960. It's just that
I would add the following: that fires are by nature exponential via, the mechanism of their spread. And if they are of a sort that can be contained, there'll be a very small number, but if they can't, they will exponentially grow into a very large number and produce that kind of, I don't know, what's the name for it? But it can either be a very small one or a very, very, very large one. And the difference between one and the other is prevention and initial intervention and how successful those efforts are in initial containment.
Yeah, on October 2nd, 1976, there was the Cronin Creek fire within the Nehalem watershed that was 834 acres. And that would have been a major fire in the intervening years following the Tillamook burn. So this is the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer. This is specific to the Lower Nehalem. Note this geographic definition of the Lower Nehalem doesn't correspond to the Watershed Council boundaries. The Nehalem is divided under this as lower, middle, upper, and headwaters. But I wanted to call attention, in terms of 2008 to 2019, only 12 acres burned, and also all human ignition sources. Within the Lower Nehalem, the housing density where people live, greater than 3 people per acres or more dispersed population. Also, in terms of what fire intensity could be expected should there be fire on the landscape, what's important to keep in mind is once flame lengths are greater than 4 feet, that's really the point at which firefighters are no longer able to directly engage, with hand tools face to face with the fire. There would need to be aerial and or mechanical responses to the fire at that point. You can see in some areas within the Lower Nehalem, there could be greater than 11-foot flame lengths. And then also, well, as pointed out, by one of the people who's already made a comment, 81% of the Lower Nehalem River consisting of conifers, and then only about 6% of that area as hardwoods. I'll be really interested to see what I find with regards to research for prior to the Tillamook burn or prior to European settlement, what that composition across the landscape in fact was. Okay, now fire history, fire ignitions for the Middle Nehalem. In this case, there is one lightning strike. There are 16 fires for the Middle Nehalem between 2008 and 2019. Again, mostly human-caused ignitions, just one lightning strike. You can see housing density across the Middle Nehalem. Again, dominated 79% as conifer. In this case, 13% hardwood within the Middle Nehalem. And then the North Fork of the Nehalem, a total number of 6 ignitions between 2008 and 2019. Again, all of them human caused. Here's the housing density across the North Fork of the Nehalem. In this case, North Fork of the Nehalem, 88% conifer and 4% hardwoods. So again, questions about that environmental history of the region and the composition of forests prior to European settlements and or prior to the Tillamook Burn. So going into the 2021 fire season, U.S. Drought Monitor for Oregon, so you can see areas of moderate to severe drought across the Coast Range. Monthly precipitation in April, below 50% for much of the Pacific, almost all of the Pacific Northwest, under 50% below the monthly precipitation levels. And then also a map of real-time stream flow compared to historical stream flow for the day of the year. And you can see stream flows being really low throughout the Coast Range. So what you can do to protect your home, family, and land. There's the home ignition zone concept that was developed by USDA Forest Service scientist Jack Cohen in the 1990s in terms of experimental research into how homes ignite due to the effects of radiant heat. For all intents and purposes, the HIZ is divided into 3 zones. So in that immediate zone of 0 to 5 feet, it's really important to clean roofs and gutters of dead leaves, debris and pine needles that could catch embers, replace or repair any loose or missing shingles or roof tiles to prevent ember penetration, reduce embers that could pass through vents in the eaves by installing an 1/8 of an inch metal mesh screening, clean debris from exterior attic vents and install 1/8 of an inch metal mesh screening to reduce embers from entering the attic, repair or replace damaged or loose window screens and any broken window screen or box in areas below patios and decks with wire mesh to prevent debris and combustible materials from accumulating. Move any flammable materials away from the wall exteriors, mulch, flammable plants, leaves and needles, firewood piles, anything that can burn. You don't want anything stored under your porch. And then that intermediate zone, 5 to 30 feet from home, landscaping, hardscaping. You can employ careful landscaping to create breaks that will help influence and decrease fire behavior. So clear vegetation from under large stationary propane tanks, create fuel breaks with driveways, walkways, paths, patios, and decks. Keep lawns and native grasses mowed to a height of about 4 inches. Remove ladder fuels, vegetation under trees so a surface fire can't reach the crowns. Prune trees up to 6 to 10 feet from the ground. Don't exceed 1/3 of the overall tree height. Space trees to have a minimum of 18 feet between the crowns, with the distance increasing with the percentage of slope. Here's a visual in terms of that tree spacing, but basically the idea is that if there is a crown fire that is approaching your home, by having this tree spacing and following the principles of that home ignition zone, that crown fire could become a ground fire before it reaches your house, which would give your house a better chance of surviving. So for that home protection zone, here's an aerial view of that home protection zone between the 0 to 5 feet, out to 30 feet, and then also out to 100 feet. And then also a visual kind of cross section of what vegetation could look like as you get further away from your home. So that extended zone, 30 to 100 feet and maybe even out to 200 feet. The goal isn't to eliminate fire, but to interrupt the fire's path and keep flames smaller and on the ground. Dispose of heavy accumulations of ground litter debris, remove dead plant and tree material, remove small conifers growing between mature trees, remove vegetation adjacent to storage sheds or other outbuildings within the area. Here's another really good visual representation, I think. Really important to try to have 100 feet of garden hose attached to your house. And then also making sure that, you know, wood piles or fuel tanks or other burnable materials are removed to at least 30 feet away from your structure. And then also to try to mow vegetation 100 feet from the structure. Another thing that you could do would be to form a fire-wise community, form a board or committee of residents and other applicable wildfire stakeholders. You can have a group comprised not only of the interested residents, but also ask for the participation of the local fire department, ODF, elected officials, emergency manager. And this group can collaborate on identifying the site's boundary and size. Fire-wise sites need to have a minimum of 8 individual single-family dwelling units, but are limited to a maximum of 2,500. There can be multiple sites located within a single large master plan community or HOA. Obtain a written wildfire risk assessment from ODF or from the local fire department. The assessment should be a community-wide view that identifies areas of successful wildfire risk reduction and areas where improvements could be made. Emphasis should be on the general conditions of the home and related home ignition zone. The assessment is a living document and needs to be updated at a minimum of every 5 years. For the third webinar series of the Fire Aware, Fire Prepared Wildfire Wednesdays that occurred in April, building community for wildfire resilience, Mike Ang of Low Steam Canyon in Northeast Oregon talks about his experience in forming a Firewise community and how he worked with his neighbors and others to realize a low steam Firewise community. There aren't that many Firewise communities that are within the coast. There are none within the upper or lower Nehalem. But if you are interested in forming a Firewise community, please let me know. And also the Oregon Department of Forestry and local fire departments. I think that, you know, that OSU Extension, Oregon Department of Forestry and local fire departments could help landowners and communities form Firewise communities if that is desired, and also if that makes sense. If, you know, you can't fit a square peg into a round hole, so there may be other ways forward for increasing fire resilience across the landscape that don't include Firewise. There's also EQIP grants, environmental quality improvement grants through Natural Resource Conservation Service. So this could include treatments to build fire resistance and resilience. I would say with regards to prescribed fire, I don't know of any areas across the Coast Range that are forested that I would want to apply prescribed burning at this time. There certainly was fire across this landscape. Well, historically with the Tillamook Burn and other burns that we've seen during this presentation, but also fire used as a tool across the landscape by Native Americans. And I'm also cognizant that, as Dan Donato said in the previous speaker series in May, it just does not make, thinning is not going to be what saves people within the Coast Range from fire. In terms of using the EQIP grants, you can see the experience of Rob Guttridge in Clackamas County. He worked with his neighbors and family members at a landscape scale within Clackamas County using EQIP grants to try to build fire resilience across the landscape. Okay, so you can sign up for emergency alerts. I'm sorry, I should have updated this slide, but I would definitely recommend, depending on where you live within the Nehalem, or if you don't live in the Nehalem, signing up for emergency alerts through your county is really important. So you could sign up for the Lower Nehalem would probably be predominantly Tillamook and Clatsop counties. And then the Upper Nehalem could include Clatsop, Tillamook, Columbia, and Washington counties. But you can sign up through the county emergency management systems to sign up for emergency alerts that would include not only wildfires, but also other natural disasters or emergencies. So some key points.
Follow up on that.
One second, I'm just going to conclude and then happy to take questions and have the conversation. One moment. So some key points. Under the right conditions, fire is a risk within the Nehalem watershed. High temperatures, low humidity, dry fuels, and also east winds of August and September. But also, as evidenced by most recently by the Pike Road Fire, there can be spread of fire with northwest winds as well. More research is needed to elucidate a robust fire history for the Coast Range. In the Coast Range, lightning can cause fire, but it is rare. The vast majority of fires in the region are human caused. And you can take steps to prepare for wildfire and foster fire resilient landscapes. Thank you all. I really appreciate the invitation to come here and happy to take your questions. I've put my email address in there if you're unable to stay through the Q&A and want to contact me one-on-one. This is, wow, this is 11 years ago now. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru for 4 years, and I worked closely with Peru's Protected Area Service. And in this case, there was a wildfire in Chacamarca, a historical sanctuary just south of Lake Junin in the central Andes of Peru. And in this case, Peru's park guards and community members that were in communities adjacent to these protected areas, as well as Peace Corps, went out with some sheepskins to battle a rangeland fire at about 14,000 feet. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions or comments or have a dialogue in general with you all. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to present to you all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, if that's all right, unless you want me to leave it on to go back to slides. I'll turn it off, and if we need to, I'll bring it back on.
That's a good plan. Thank you so much, Aaron. That was a lot of really good information, and I'm glad we recorded it because I feel like this is going to be one where I want to be able to go back and look at particular spots of it again later too.
Like I said too, keep in mind, well, 80% of my position is education and outreach and extension programming, but then there is 10% that's applied research and scholarship. And so I'm definitely hoping to have my own research based either archival or field observations, and then GIS and remote sensing. I think too, for other larger issues that agencies or watershed councils or private industry or small woodland owners or any other constituency that has questions that I can't really answer with my 10% applied research appointment, I can call on the resources of Forestry and Natural Resources Extension and the College of Forestry at large, and networks out from there too. So thank you.
Excellent. I do have a question here in the chat for you.
Okay.
And the question is, what is the historical wind pattern for coast fires? Is it east winds predominantly?
In those major, Nestucca, Yakina, The Tillamook burns, particularly 1933, that is a major key to those conflagrations, were those synoptic east wind events that occurred usually August or September. That said, when I was talking to landowners who were impacted by the Pike Road Fire in Tillamook County, not within the Nehalem watershed, Tillamook Bay watershed, it would have been. There were northwest winds that did contribute to the expansion of the fire, but then also I believe that the winds changed directions, and so the fire was behaving one way, and then conditions changed, and the fire kind of changed directions due to that wind changing. But in terms of those major conflagrations of hundreds of thousands of acres exploding, and huge mushroom clouds across the landscape, those are usually associated with the east wind events, but also generally as well preceded by drought, and what else? Preceded by drought, yeah, and then also those east wind events.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I didn't. Okay. So I'm interested in the role or the lack of hardwood mosaics in our forests here. I live in the middle of it. I'm right next to Nehalem Bay, and there's a general void of life here. And it always seems like it's because of a lack of forest productivity that would be granted by hardwoods, as opposed to a monolithic, pine forest.
Yeah, ideally across the landscape mosaic, you would see different ages of stands of trees, but then also, yes, the composition of those trees. Now, keep in mind, depending on the hardwood, but some species such as red alder are pioneer species, so
Right.
they can go into, but yes, definitely, land management decisions, be they, local, state, or federal agencies, or industrial timber, or small woodland owners, there may be specific land management objectives in terms of, harvesting products. I do know for sure, though, that, small woodland owners who wish to be managing for wildlife habitat would be well served. A small woodland owner can be managing for timber harvest as well, but if they also want to be managing for wildlife habitat, the presence of those hardwoods would be really, really important to wildlife habitat in general.
Right. And what I found generally in nature is, that it's a two-way street. So if nature offers something in one direction, it usually offers something in the other. So if you're, if you're focused on, productivity, you might say, well, you need the hardwoods for, a fuel source or a food source, for mammals and birds and, but what if there are also fire breaks?
Good question. I would say that certainly in terms of that, managing like a home ignition zone, or put this, there may be, specific trees with fire resistant trunks that could be, great to have within the landscape of, your specific property. I think too, yeah, it's a good question with regards to what was the mosaic of land covers and land uses and the mosaic of those different species, not only
Right.
Douglas fir, but
You back to like, you know, okay, when the first peoples came over, they found whatever. But I think it's widely known that they turned it into a park type environment. And, how different is our current forest system versus what the First Nations people had established through their forest management system? And it obviously lasted 13,000 years because that's, their first recorded date.
I would definitely say that, I would like to build partnerships with the tribes across Western Oregon and understand their management practices better. And I would also like to understand the historical record better in terms of that mosaic of different species across the landscape and the specific management practices that most likely included fire. I will say the OSU Extension Fire Program does work with the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council. And as I said before, I really wouldn't want to apply prescribed fire in any forests across the Coast Range, at least that I have seen thus far. In certain areas, in terms of ecological objectives, such as the spotted butterfly, the Nature Conservancy burns at Cascade Head, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service burns at Nestucca-Nesqueen. And so, your points are well taken. There is a lot more research to be done, and also I think that having a vision with multiple stakeholders, agencies, watershed councils, kind of multiple constituencies at the table, visioning, what they would want a landscape to look like and what values across that landscape they would seek to manage. I think that that's an important process. I definitely believe it could be a contentious one. In terms of extension, I don't have any regulatory or administrative power, but I definitely think that that's kind of an advantage because, I could convene all those parties and, serve as a facilitator.
Right, but would it be wild to restore a region to a pre-Columbian state, if we even knew what that was?
Well, one, you'd have to know what it is, but then the other aspect I would say is it feasible to restore it to that state? I think that in some cases, the labor and financial barriers to restoring something to a pre-Columbian landscape, could be, prohibitive. The labor and financial costs associated with that. That's not to say that like steps couldn't be taken.
Tourism? I mean, people would flock to it. I think if you built it, they would come. But that's a whole wild speculation.
Okay. Hey, Greg,
Maybe another question here in the chat, if we can jump over to that.
Sure.
The question is, starts off the statement, it is valuable to let tall grass and wildflowers grow, issue seeds, and perpetuate the healthy plants. So mowing them to 4 inches in July or August harms that. So balancing that against the possible risk of 2-foot tall grass spreading a fire, that's a concern. Also related, how can one measure when conditions are dry enough to support a wildfire in grass or bushes or trees? Is there some sort of moisture meter for measuring it in vegetation? And if one is sprinkling the grass and bushes so that they stay green and don't dry out, will that prevent them from being a fuel source in July or August?
Okay, let me give some initial thoughts, but then also I'm gonna go ahead and put my email in the chat. Please follow up with me because I think I'd have to do, a little bit more thinking and kind of researching on the topic. But your points are really well taken that the grass and the wildflowers growing and being healthy is, incredibly important to wildlife habitat. It's also, a great aesthetic as well. I think that there is a balance. There certainly would be a fire danger if those fuels, if that grass and those wildflowers are, really dried out. They can be a fire hazard. And then also, in terms of the mowing, there may be times that it is so dry that it is in fact not safe to mow. There may be, there may be burn bans across the county, or there may be other, local or state restrictions on mowing at specific times. But yes, your points are really well taken with regards to native grasses or meadows and wildflowers, and their importance across the landscape, across the mosaic of habitats. So yeah, if Stuart asked me that question, Stuart, please follow up with me. I'll try to get you a better answer going on down the road. And then looks like we got another one.
Yep. So I'll read it out for the recording here. It is hard to identify in your fire history maps. You are likely interested in a stand of trees with old growth characteristics in the Nehalem drainage near Jewel. This stand contained large Douglas fir trees 108 to 126 years old in an area of red alder. Many were logged by ODF in the Homesteader Timber Sale, Area 2. And then there's a URL for more information about it.
Oh, great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that compared to other, how do I put this? There are some proxy data records for, what vegetation was like historically. Most of them are concentrated in the Central Coast area. And so, I mean, I'll probably create a wish list of areas that for proxy data record collection, looking at lake sediment cores more for the North Coast. I think that would be important going forward. But then, yeah, that historical record, I think it's just going to take time, and like county archives and the state archives and newspaper archives, a lot of multiple sources to be drawn upon. But one of the things we really don't have, whereas in other areas of the country and even on the western slopes of the Cascades, you're able to use dendrochronology as a powerful proxy record. Because we have stand replacing fires here on the coast, dendro just simply isn't available to us for, creating those complex fire histories that, in many cases date back over 1,000 years. And also, like I said, the standards of the data, are going to be very different. Some of the, I have all the list of all these fires that like Charles Daigle mentioned in, a 1929 publication, like a meteorological bulletin. But he doesn't cite, any individual. He doesn't cite, ODF, or, there's no, how do I put this? Sometimes I find great sources, and then I also end up with more questions than answers. But I really appreciate you sending that homesteader report. I'll check out that URL, and I'm also looking to, over time visit landowners and also just gain an understanding of the landscape, not just through GIS or remote sensing, and not just through an archive, but walking the landscape, depending on, how do I put this? One of the most rewarding things as a naturalist is to be able to go through the landscape and be able to read the landscape as if you were reading a book. And so I've still got a long ways to go, but there are a lot of clues that are offered across the landscape, and being able to understand them and know their importance and meaning is really important. So, all right. Anybody else have questions or comments? I really appreciate the opportunity, Zach, to speak to you all, and yeah, Thank you all. And like I said, please, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat again so you all have access to it. And I really view this as, I'm really glad that Zach extended the invite and extended the speaker series for a month. Big shoes to fill coming in after Dan Donato had a great presentation as well. Definitely check that out on the Lower Nehalem Watershed Council YouTube channel. This isn't just a one-off. I'm looking to build partnerships and collaborations across the coast, and that just takes time. And we're also coming out of COVID, so hopefully we'll be able to have, in-person meetings, and I'll be able to, in my role of extension, be able to convene those stakeholders that, may in fact previously or at different times had contentious relationships. But I think that going forward across the complex mosaic of not only ecosystems, but also land tenure and the ownership across this region, it really requires thinking outside the box, and it really requires thinking not just like a square box of BLM or a square box of industrial timber, or little piece of 5 acres of a small woodland owner here. It requires thinking at a landscape scale. And definitely we'll be looking forward to those opportunities in the future. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I was really happy to extend it by another month to get another talking about fire, because it's a, if you'll excuse the pun, hot topic. And I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times. But nonetheless, I was really happy to extend it and do another talk on fire, because it is so important that we be talking and thinking about it now. And so thank you everybody for coming. Like Aaron mentioned, we have all of our talks from the last year here uploaded to our YouTube channel. Just look up Lower Nehalem Watershed Council and you can find it. I also put the PayPal link if you want to donate to the Watershed Council in the chat earlier. Aaron's email is right there. You can find my contact information on the Watershed Council's website. And I hope everybody has a great evening.
Thanks a lot, Zach. Thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. Have a great,
y'all.
Yeah, have a great evening.
Thanks.